West, and that is Greek thinking. That is completely different from the way the Jews think about leadership. First, you'll be a servant, and then you can lead. So that, I believe, was echoed in the lecture. Number two, I wrote down that it problematizes what we see today in leadership. There are different models, and of course, people would generally say, well, good leader should have this, should be charismatic, and so on. I think this was something which Bruce Winter also addressed in his book, I think titled Roman Wives, Roman Women in thinking Roman, that's Corinth or something. I think it's that's Bruce Winter. He wrote something in the same thing. So for those who may be interested in reading more about that. Then number three, there's something which I actually wrote down about my own work and draws on the work of Noel Heather. And I know that some scholars are now looking at leadership using different analytical frameworks. For example, multimodality and CDA. So, and that is something which I also found, got from the lecture, where we have hidden meanings. The consumers just see things, but they don't actually know what the hidden meanings are. So now they're using all these analytical frameworks to expose the flaws in leadership, which was also echoed during the lecture. Then finally, I wrote down something else which I think would be of benefit to students here. For those who want to use ethnography, one of the things you're told is that you make what is familiar to you to become unfamiliar. The vice principal is a leader himself, a church leader. And then to come up with all this, I just said to myself that he must have made what is familiar very unfamiliar for him to be able to see, for it turning leadership into an object of research. And that will help you to come up with a number of, you'll be able to analyze it. So I'll just stop here. I know you've written down some other things yourself. So if you have any question for the Vice Principal, please let me see your hands up. So give you time to. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So we'll start from.
Thank you very much, sir, for that meeting. People are looking at me, you are a leader or a leader. That's illuminating discussion or sure. I was trying to follow what you were saying, and I have a problem in an area reconciling some of the things that I'm learning from this lecture, or I got from this lecture. That's in the area of reconciling what you say about tall size, identification or definition of leadership as a servant, servant of God. So all leaders should be seen as a servants of God, and also that leadership is first on a person that will be a good leader. In that respect, should be somebody that didn't have quest for leadership, but leadership was forced on him, as it were, by God. So leadership by election,
I very quoted him.
Yes, I know. Yes, I just feel that it may help us throw some light into what's going on in my mind. So now, when we look at that and try to reconcile it with other things about how we should appoint leaders, make sure that all the criteria that are identified in the Second Timothy chapter 3 are adhered to, even to the extent of making sure that the person being appointed is endorsed by those who are very close to him, or by the relatives or the spouse at home. Then reconciling the two will be difficult. And so I'm trying to work it out in my heart, and I thought maybe you can. Do you understand where?
Yeah, I do. Maybe what I want to do is to take everything together because of time.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for the. I want to go the same way as Dr. Lawal. In the sense that you said you have to announce the name of someone that's going to be a leader, so that you can get a feedback concerning the person. Okay, for example, of the woman you have just mentioned that have got affair with the man, and as a Christian, we have a tendency of repentance. And in this case, maybe after he has done with the woman, he has repented, and he has become a born again, then by the virtue of his job or his character in the church, before he can be selected anyway, you have seen some character that's warranted, that qualified to that position. So, and as a repented person, I think from my own stand, I won't stop. I won't allow somebody to just come and say it's not worthy to be that position based on one person evidence. So, or if it's majority, but if it's just one person, what can we do, sir?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Sorry, Marvin, please.
I'm very happy with the engagement with Frank Damasio of the Holman's Bible Dictionary, looking at particular words such as arche and the diakonos, or diakono. I was more concerned with the word episcope or episkopos used in 1 Timothy 3, which from my observation is a feminine noun in terms of the Greek context of the word. So in light of that, should this then exclude women from the discussion regarding character in leadership? That's my first question. The second question is, what if a man a masculine man in this context, has been attacked by a group or a person who identifies character flaws but is non-existent? In other words, the intention is to assassinate his or her character. Should such a one still remain in leadership? And finally, you mentioned the idea of despotic leadership, but I think I would like to hear a little bit more about the democratic or laissez-faire type of approach to leadership. Those are mine.
Yes, Marvin has somewhat stolen my clothes. Because I was going to ask a question about women in leadership, which I think is one of the hot issues in the church today. And whenever you have to look for theology, usually you find a book of feminist theology. And I wondered what your reflections were on women in leadership, and whether how do we deal with that really? And I was looking again at 1 Timothy 3 and seeing that yes, it's mostly about men, isn't it? I mean, obviously the wives of men, but it's mostly about men in leadership. There is a reference in verse 11 to women, but I just wondered, what your reflections were on that.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the lecture, by the way. It's very helpful.
Okay, Dr. Tukas.
Yes, thank you, sir. I do appreciate the way you read 1 Timothy chapter 3 in terms of the different categories which are not looked at from that way before, and the distinction you made about the disposition and also the reputation. I think that distinction to be very helpful. Thank you, sir. For the kind of definition of leadership that you started with, it tends to, from my perspective, it tends to complicate the recommendations that we are putting forward towards the end, in the sense that if leadership is defined simply as servant of the Lord, and the entire community of the church people fits into that definition, when you now suggest a way forward that tends to raise the standard, which will make it very difficult for a lot of people within the congregation to fit into the pattern of the recommendation you are suggesting. I will want to think and ask this question: should the definition of leadership, in light of the conclusion you are drawing there, should it not be much more appropriate to those who are being called into leadership, called in the sense of having a kind of commissioning, not the fact that because I'm a Christian in the local church, I can serve in the leadership, but much more by virtue that I'm being called into Christian vocation, then the recommendation you are putting forward should be applied in that category. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you all very, very much for your very, very beautiful contributions, which of course would enrich the work further, because it's just, as we all know, a kind of draft, which has to be, I have to take on board, Thank you very much for everything. But let me go to the first comment by Dr. Lawal. Maybe I need to say that personally too, I didn't agree with Tozer. Maybe I need to make that clear. But in an academic paper of this nature, of course, and let me say this, I've tried to blend both practical approach and academic approach, because I also know that the journal for which we're preparing some of these papers, we want to make it open to as many people, pastors and different other people. So I will make it clear, but I think in a paper like this, it's good to expose people to different thinkings and different views, of people. I don't believe in a reluctant leader. Sometimes it may work, but I don't think all the time it works. I maybe jump over to what Dr. Tukasi just said, that oftentimes even the so-called reluctant leaders have been called. There were people who had a call. Let me quickly go to what, Israel, talking about the issue of the lady. Now, the reason I reacted that way to the issue of the lady was I thought the proper thing that the young man should have done, if he was truly repentant, was to come and report himself and not to hear from that person. And he should have restituted. And when he was confronted, time wouldn't allow me to add it then. When he was confronted, he didn't deny. And we gave him a punishment to serve according to the regulation of the church, which he did for 6 months. He was not allowed to minister. He was given a designated place in the church to stay. These are just the church, way of disciplining people. He did. And today, he has reason to become a very senior pastor. You see? So, it wasn't that it wasn't investigated. He accepted it. And I pointed out to him, what was wrong. And I honestly think that if I have to do it again, I'll probably do it that same way. If he had reported himself before the lady came, that would have, it would have been a no issue. But further, he tried to cover it. And of course, we know what the Bible says concerning that. Now, Marvin raised the issue of women, which David also raised. Again, there was a presupposition that you could have read that I have nothing against women in leadership. As a matter of fact, I actively believe that women should be in leadership. So it was a conclusion that, well, like I said, it's a presupposition that I thought you guys should know my position, but maybe I need to bring it out clearly. And candidly, I strongly believe that, the way Miles Monroe explained it, which, those, I love him, of course. The pastor feels that I'm too much of an acolyte. He doesn't seem to have too much, should I say, respect or regard for, but I see him as a very brilliant guy, and particularly in that. He explained it this way, that when God created man, what God created originally was man, and that's true. And in that man was male and female. You said? Well, this is, you see, when God said, when he created man in his own image and likeness, that is biblical language, is spiritual creation. So when God is speaking to us, he only sees man. And that man could be a male, could be a female. And that was why God could take a woman out of the man. But the Bible tells us that in the beginning he created man, and male and female, he created them. So inside of, and so, in every woman there's a man, and in every man there's a woman. So I, have no problem at all, just to make it very brief, for women to be in positions of leadership. And I think almost, except maybe the Catholic Church, I think almost all denominations now are coming to terms with the fact that, women have been held back, long enough. Marvin also talked about, what if a man has been assassinated in his character or is being unjustifiably attacked? And the answer I give to Israel is what I would just give, which is that every case that, must be investigated. It would be grossly unfair to just rely on some spurious allegations. Yes.
In retrospect, I was just thinking in terms of the example you gave of the young lady.
Yes.
That maybe the young lady, I don't know the situation, but maybe she is having a vendetta against that particular person. And now that he's going to admit something he has repented of for years, buried it or whatever, and also she was complicit in the behavior. So I'm saying maybe because she knows now that he is moving up to answer that call, she is bringing this as, and I don't know the situation.
Yeah, you see, like again, maybe if if I can repeat the facts a little, one reason why I took it a bit, I'm coming, sir, I'm mindful of time, but I took it seriously was, is looking at, is because at the time he committed the offense, he was already representing the church. He was the youth pastor. He was the youth leader. So if he was an ordinary member, I would have said, well, maybe that was the level of his spiritual maturity at that time. But as somebody who was supposed to be overseeing the youth and now feeding on them, I thought that was, Well,
Sorry, I don't want to prolong it, but can I just say that I think it is not true to say, I think, that the issue of women in leadership is settled as far as other churches are concerned. I mean, there are very strong churches in this country that believe that leadership is male. I'd just like to say that
Yeah.
it may not be a problem in Pentecostalism,
Yeah.
but if you move out of Pentecostalism into the Reformed stream of churches, whether it's Anglican or independent, you've still got the issue of women in leadership.
Well, I do recognize that, but my candid opinion is that some of these issues will be resolved, and I'm almost certain that in another 20-25 years, most churches, would have, come all the way around. And then talking about the, maybe I need to speak. I haven't talked about, the despotic leader. That maybe I should talk about the democratic approach. Of course, I'll take that on board. I appreciate, that.
The laissez-faire.
Yes, the lesson, yes. I will share. And I think the issue of women in leadership that David raised, I've already addressed that. And yes, the final point, which Dr. took us, I think, that is a very, very good observation, very wonderful observation, that it seems to contradict the conclusion, if we're talking about the fact that you have to be a servant, but on the other hand, we're saying that the regulations must be strictly followed, and that if somebody were called, then of course we can subject them, well, I will surely look further into that, and I'll see how I address that within the paper, before we send it in finally. And I want to once again appreciate each and every one of us, and for the principal for being patient with us, for exceeding, he has told me we must not exceed 4 o'clock. Thank you very much.